Hi folks, Jeb here from TogetherMade. Today I'm going to go through the alternative stitch for the compass case we just released with Self-Reliance Outfitters. It's a case we designed with Dave Canterbury of Pathfinder School. It was designed to hold a compass. This is the Sun2 MC2. It can sit on your belt with these slots, or it can ride on a lanyard. It's a handy little case for the compass, but it holds all sorts of little incidentals and everyday carries. Perfect fit for a deck of cards. I've been carrying mine with a Leatherman mid-size, a Wave, and a small flashlight. Anyways, I think it's a really useful size case, and I really like the way that the design came out. So we walked through in the main build video how to do the traditional saddle stitch, and today we're going to work through this crossover saddle stitch. I don't know what it's actually called. I came up with a stitch because I wanted to do an alternative stitch. I looked and I couldn't find what I wanted, so I came up with this. I asked around a little bit, and I haven't found a name yet. So if anybody knows the actual name for this, let me know. But what we're going to do is, it's a saddle stitch, but we're going to do a crossover with one of the needles, and you end up back in the original hole. Then you do a saddle stitch, and then you do the crossover again. I'll show you in detail what that looks like. But you end up with a saddle stitch fully down, front and back, and a crossover at every stitch. So we're going to zoom in now and do that in detail. But I think it looks great either way, so it's your choice. One thing with this stitch, obviously, is we're not going to be burnishing that edge there. So if you want to do any burnishing of these edges, that are behind the crossover, do that before you start. So I don't think it's strictly necessary, but it's not a bad idea to burnish those edges, do the stitch, and then come back when you do the finishing step and burnish the rest of these edges. I think that looks quite nice. But you don't have to burnish everything up front, just the ones that are behind that crossover. So let's get down to it. We're going to get started here. I'm going to take the tape off of this. Okay, and so this stitch requires more thread. So we're still going to be able to use half of this hank of thread that we're getting into now for each run, but you're not going to have a lot of excess. So make sure in that first stitch you do that you're getting things even on both sides. So again, we're going to get this guy through the eye of the needle, pull it through 6 inches, 2 inches from the end. We're going to pierce the thread like that. Slide that down over the eye of the needle, pull tight. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of that. So again, we cut the original hank of 2 meters down to 1 meter. So this is 1 meter with a needle on each end. Okay. All right, so we're locked in now. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start, and all the sides are the same, so we're just going to show you one. But we're going to start by holding those two up together. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through the top, like so. I'm going to get half the thread on each side. So I have an equal length of the thread on each side of the hole. On this first one, I'm going to go through and wrap on the outside a couple times. So that's part of the detail of this is I'm going to put 2 wraps in. So there's one And then I'm going to come back and put a second one in. Just get those lined up how I want them. You have the opportunity to kind of position them as you snug it up. Okay, so there's 2 wraps to start. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be consistent with how I do this side to side. So this first one's a little tight because I've got those 2 wraps, but I'm going to start with this front side needle, and I'm going to come over the edge, and that sets the first part of my crossover. And then I'm going to go back through hole 1 where I've got those double wraps, so it's a little tight in there. And I'm going to pull, so I've still all with that same needle. Now, I want this X, or this crossover, to be positioned right. So I'm just going to kind of get it where I want it, and then I'm going to pull it tight. Okay, so now I've got both needles coming out of hole 1 again. So I'm going to now do a normal saddle stitch. So from this side, we'll go through, and then we'll come through from the opposite side. Okay, so I just did 2 wraps. I used the needle coming out of this side. I crossed over, tightened that, and then did a saddle stitch. So I'm going to do it again, and I'm always going to go from this side, the same side I started on, so that the thread stays the same, because when I do the saddle stitch, these needles obviously switch places, and so if I just keep doing it consistently, we won't end up with odd lengths. So I'm going to go over the edge. So I started with the needle coming out of this side that's facing me. I'm going to go over the edge. I'm going to come through. I'm not going to tighten that completely. I'm just going to kind of snug it up. And then I'm going to come make my cross. I'm going to pull this backside needle out of the way, that thread out of the way. It's got a nice spot for me to come through. I'm going to get this lined up how I like it. That looks good. I'm going to snug it. Now I've got both coming out of hole 2. So I'm going to saddle stitch down to hole 3. Okay. So there we are in hole 3. Now, same thing, front side needle. I'm going to go over. The edge. And then with the same needle, I'm going to make my cross, come back to the previous hole, come through. Okay. So now I'm going to snug that up. And, maybe I'll come back and just kind of move that a little bit. So you can reposition a little bit, get it how you like it. Okay, so now we've got back in hole 3, and we're just going to saddle stitch down to hole 4. And there we are. Okay, again, same side. I'm going to come over my edge, come through, take that same needle, go back through the previous hole to make our X or our crossover. I'm going to grab both sides, make sure I like the way that looks, snug it up, and saddle stitch down. All right, so now we're coming back down to our last 3 here. So again, I'm up and over, coming back to the previous hole, the same needle, making my X, getting that straightened out, snugging that up. We'll do our saddle stitch. Okay. Snug it up. This is our second to last hole now. So, same deal. So that hole's a little bit tight. I'm just going to open it up. There we go. Okay, so I'm through from this side. And I come back, make my X. Okay, I'll snug that up. Now you can see that I'm getting pretty close on thread here. I'll show you in a second. So, it's important that you make it even. So if you look at how much thread I have left, you know, I've got maybe 5 inches on one side and 6 on the other. So here we are. We're going to come in our last hole. We're going to do our normal deal, where we're going to come through. I'm going to go across and come through, and then I'm going to go back to the previous hole to make the X, a crossover, pull that snug. Now, I'm going to saddle stitch down, to the last spot from both sides. Okay, and we're going to just do that double wrap to match there. So I'm just going to pick whichever side's just slightly longer to do the double wrap with. So this side happens to be slightly longer. So I'm going to come through once, and then I'm going to come through again, and that gives us the 2 wraps. I don't want them crossing over each other, so you can just kind of guide that in with your fingernail. I'm going to pull that tight. Okay, so I've got a double wrap here, a double wrap here, full saddle stitch, crossovers at every stitch. Now to finish it off, we're just going to back stitch. These holes are full of thread, so you might need to wiggle it a little bit to get it through there. And, you know, in this case, you don't need to back stitch, you know, 4 stitches or anything. We're going to do, here we'll just do that 1. And this is, for this one, this is the front of the case. So we're going to put our tag ends and our burnt over on this side. But, I mean, this thing has got some real stability, so I don't think this is going to come undone. So I just did a second stitch, and what I'm going to do to finish it off is I'm just going to come through the front side. So I've gone doubled back 1, 2, 3. Now I've got both coming out of here, and I'm going to clip those. Okay, so I just clipped them to 1/8 of an inch, and then I'll just melt those with a lighter, and they'll just sort of disappear there. So that's what that looks like, and then we would proceed to do the same thing here, and then repeat on the other 2 sides. All right, so that's a wrap on our crossover saddle stitch. I think it turned out looking quite nice. I think it's a stitch we're going to use in other projects moving forward, so it's another tool to have in the toolbox. I hope you enjoyed that today, and hope you enjoyed making your case. We'll see you next time.